Earnest, serious and intentional. Wadsworth made earnest attempts to reconcile. When you are doing something in earnest, you are carrying it out with a purpose and a serious face. You can ask earnest questions in class or apply an earnest effort in college. Did you know that Oscar Wilde can help you remember the word earnest? The famous playwright titled his renowned play The Importance of Being Earnest, a trivial comedy for serious people. In this play, Wilde was being the opposite of earnest by mocking the overpoweringly serious, humorless nature of Victorian England. Think of the last time you were being earnest. Solemn, serious, formal, and grave. Yesterday's funeral was a solemn affair. If the author is depicting a sad event like a funeral or a separation, it may be described as solemn. You can make a solemn request or file a solemn petition. Deferential, showing respect toward others who are superior to you in any way. The student's behavior was deferential toward the teacher. Rookies act deferentially toward the veterans. If a character in a passage is doing something out of deference, it's done out of respect. Deference means respect. Out of deference, the bride allowed the groom's parents to buy a wedding dress for her. Here we can infer that the bride isn't too pleased with having the future-in-laws pick out a dress for her, but she surrendered out of respect. Revere, to deeply respect and worship. To be in awe of. My grandmother revered God and went to church every day. When you treat something with reverence, you treat it with special care and respect. His father treated his baseball glove with reverence. Reverence means respect, while irreverence means disrespect. Irreverent critics destroyed the director's confidence. Benevolent, well-meaning and charitable. Ben was a kind boss and wanted to create a benevolent environment at his firm. Elephants are always considered kind and well-meaning animals, so thinking of a benevolent elephant may help you remember the word. Endearing, adorable, inspiring love and affection. His radical openness and honesty were endearing. A person's endearing qualities might include being naive, genuine, sweet, and charming. Sinister, bad or evil. She made a sinister remark about his health condition. The word sin, which describes wrongdoing, can help you remember that the adjective sinister is linked to something bad or evil. The following four words come from the same Latin root mal, meaning bad or evil, malice, malignant, malicious, malevolent. All four of these words denote having or showing an intention to do evil to others. Possessed by a malevolent force, he burned his painting. These words often show up in the Asvab answer choices. Here are some examples of them in context. To underscore how Lucy's benevolent intentions contradict her malicious conduct. The narrator described Lucy as a malevolent being. Thoughts filled with malice. Edward's malignant behavior. Genuine, true, real, or heartfelt. He expressed genuine love and asked a heartfelt question. The shoemaker uses genuine leather. Genuine can be used with both living subjects and inanimate objects. Candid, frank, honest, or straightforward. This candid book reveals the inner workings of the CEO. Authentic, traditional, undisturbed by novelty, based on facts, pure and honest. An authentic person is someone who is always open and real. An authentic watch is a watch that is not counterfeit. Authentic food is a traditional food that hasn't been changed over time. To authenticate is to verify authenticity. In the answer choices on the Asvab, you may see this word used in many ways. Here are some examples of them in context. Authentic by nature. Authenticate the results. Unable to be authenticated. Challenge the authenticity of the author. Virtuous, having or exhibiting morality, morally excellent, righteous. Oprah Winfrey seems like a virtuous person. Hoax, deception of a malicious or humorous manner. She was willing to get involved in a hoax just to end up among the popular crowd. Disguise, to obscure the truth or appearance. One of the girls disguised herself as a boy. Deception, the act of deceiving. The author foreshadowed Lady Carlotta's capacity for deception. Fabricate, to make up from thin air. He fabricated evidence that suited his assumptions. Complacent, marked by a fake satisfaction or happiness with the current state of things. Even though he had to watch his salt intake, he remained complacent about his health. Ambivalent, the state of having conflicting feelings. Mr. Darcy was ambivalent about marrying Elizabeth. Ambiguous, unclear or obscure. Naomi gave her mother an ambiguous answer. Please note the difference of meaning between ambiguous and ambivalent. Equivocal, unclear, open to more than one interpretation. The results of the study were equivocal, so they had to do it over. Dubious, arguable, questionable, or debatable. Instead of honest ways, Jack made money in a dubious manner. Enigmatic, difficult to interpret. Dorothy gave him an enigmatic, Mona Lisa-like smile. Denounce, to condemn, complain about publicly. A fake negative review denounced the staff for no obvious reason. Vegetarians denounce eating meat. Environmentalists denounce using plastic. Some schools denounce using cell phones at an early age. Lament, to mourn a person's death or complain about something unsatisfactory. We must lament the lack of fair pay in the workforce. Sometimes, the word lament will be used as a noun in a passage. Lament as a noun means a passionate expression of grief. Condemn, to express utter and complete disapproval. We condemned the council for enforcing the rules. Note that the word condemn is different from condoning, which means to allow to continue. These verbs often appear in the answer choices on the Asvab reading test. Here are some examples of them in context: to denounce the narrator's actions, to lament their past, to condemn the actions of the government, to deplore the father's conduct. Muse, to think about deeply. He often mused about his military service in his car. Musings usually describe memories. Reflect, to think about carefully. As I reflect on the last 5 years of my life, I sense an earnest desire to achieve my dreams. Reminisce, to indulge in the recollection of past events. Grandpa Asvab, they're all mourning, reminiscing about the past. Reminisce frequently shows up in both passages and answer choices. Nostalgic, feeling warmly sentimental about the past. Hearing his voice again made Beth nostalgic. Apprehensive, fearful that something bad might happen. People at the time were apprehensive of economic instability. Confusion alert, note that the verb apprehend does not always denote worry or fear. To apprehend someone is to arrest them. For example, the police apprehended the burglar. On the other hand, to apprehend something is to grasp it. For example, at last, he apprehended trigonometry. Restless, perpetually worried about something. Unable to mentally relax. Zawadi's doctor recommended meditation to overcome being perpetually restless. You may have heard of restless leg syndrome, RLS, which is when a person gets an irresistible urge to move their legs, especially while sitting. Agitated. Worried and nervous after the unpleasant meeting. She was really worked up and agitated. Queasy, worried and nervous to the point of being nauseous. Troubled. Many feel queasy about speaking in front of a big audience. Whenever the TV anchors talked about the perfect competitive markets, my father always felt queasy, because it was far from the reality in India. Concede, to reluctantly or unwillingly agree. After a long debate, she conceded that nothing can be done at the moment. Memory trick, thinking that when someone concedes, they say, okay, I can see it, may help you remember that to concede means to reluctantly agree. Condone, to allow something to continue happening by all means. The government shouldn't condone such immoral behavior. Condone is usually used in the negative form. Don't condone, never condone. Concur, to agree and be of the same opinion. Many scientists concur with this consensus. We often hear of the concurring opinion of the Supreme Court. This takes place when most of the Supreme Court justices agree on something and publish their decision publicly. Proliferate, to multiply and increase rapidly in number. After the war, craftsmanship was able to proliferate as factories were destroyed. Ubiquitous, appearing to be everywhere. Cell phones are ubiquitous. The Latin prefix omni means all or every. Take note that sometimes the word omnipresent may show up as an answer choice for ubiquitous. Lucrative, profitable. Working in real estate turned out to be a lucrative affair for Dominic. Poignant, evoking keen sadness. His poignant story made me cry. The word poignant most frequently shows up in the passages in phrases like poignant envy, poignant moment, or poignant portrayal. Despondent, sad or disheartened. Having lost his dog, he became despondent, as he didn't know where to begin his search. Dejected, sad and low-spirited. After being rejected, he felt deeply dejected. Violate, to break, to disregard. His neighbors violated the law when they refused to help with the investigation. Defy, to go against, to refuse to obey. She was able to defy her human instinct and jump out of a helicopter to save her life. Refute, to prove wrong without any genuine evidence. The judge had to refute the accusations. Refute often shows up in answer choices that describe the relationship between the two passages. For example, Passage 2 refutes the claim made by Lincoln in Passage 1. Negate. To invalidate, nullify. Alcohol negates the benefits of the treatment. Charles used this opportunity to negate any positive momentum the prince had built with Naomi. Mar, to impair and therefore make less than perfect. If you keep eating the icing, you will mar the cake and spoil the birthday surprise. The last album was so poorly received by the listeners, it will mar the artist's legacy. The verb mar applies to both tangible and intangible subjects. Mar can also be used as a noun, which means a flaw. The agency was investigating whether there were any mars on Edward's record. When you mar something, it is no longer pristine. Disfigure, to spoil. The appearance of the beacon was strongly disfigured by the wind and salt water. Cease, to stop existing or stop doing. After he made that sarcastic remark, Elizabeth ceased to find Mr. Darcy admirable and attractive. An untrained test taker may overlook the verb ceased and think that Elizabeth found Mr. Darcy attractive after he made the remark. Conscious of this, the Asvab will likely plant a trap and answer choice stating admirable and attractive directly from the passage. Having learned the term cease, however, you, my friend, will be immune to such trickery. When something becomes outdated, it can be described as having ceased to describe reality. Terminate, to interrupt. Your landlord can terminate the lease after it expires. The attack on Poland in 1939 terminated our peaceful village life. Finite, having an end, or a final count. We loved each other for a finite period of time. Having read this sentence, it's safe to conclude that the characters are no longer in love. Tenacious, determined and committed. Jack was tenacious in his attempts to reach the top of the mountain. Relentless, inflexible and incessant in intensity. James was relentless in trying to find a mate. The relentless summer heat drives people away from the city. Inexorable, unstoppable or impossible to prevent. Before the recession hit, the economy was facing an inexorable decline. While the word inexorable is often used in a negative connotation, it can also denote something positive that is about to happen. Once he submits his eloquent manuscript, he will experience an inexorable triumph. Inevitable, unavoidable. He reluctantly agreed to the new schedule because he knew that the shift was inevitable. Adversary, an opponent or enemy. Her adversary staged a comeback, which made Lady Carlotta feel apprehensive and agitated at all times. Rival. An opponent competing for the same goal. Richard wanted to undermine his rival. Apple is working on a virtual assistant that will be the rival of Alexa. The noun rival can denote either a person or a thing. The verb rival means to compete for superiority. Perpetrator, one carrying out an act of wrongdoing. The perpetrator, who wrote a fake negative review, should endure an inexorable punishment. Antagonist, one who actively opposes the main figure. The protagonist. The author portrayed Jack as an adamant antagonist of Richard. Contender, a contestant or candidate. Edward seems like a viable contender and may end up among the top 3. Ally, one that supports another in an ongoing effort. China has been a long-time ally of Russia. Memory trick, think about how the allies are aligned with each other to remember that ally means a supporter. Confidant, one you can trust and share secrets with. He's been a friend and confidant to some of the city's top leaders. Amiable, friendly, displaying a positive and supportive attitude. He was an amiable kid and got along with others. Disdain, an intense dislike. The rivalry was intensified because of Jack's and Nora's disdain for each other. Contempt, a feeling of dislike for something you consider inferior. The level of contempt displayed by Jacqueline was appalling. It was as if she was above us all. Reproach. To express disapproval, he reproached his wife for letting the kids run outside after dark. He hardly ever had to reproach his son because his homework was always beyond reproach. His homework was perfect. Avoid confusing these two, reproach and beyond reproach. When something is beyond reproach, it's flawless. Provenance, Origin. The luxurious rug was prized for its Iranian provenance. On the Asvab, one of the characters was puzzled by the provenance of the letters that he was receiving. Provenance is also the act of tracing artwork to its original source through bills of sale and exhibitions. Genesis, the origin or mode of formation. Scientists concur with the genesis of this consensus. Some common phrases include the genesis of the idea, the genesis for the book, and the genesis of the lifelong obsession. Inception, the starting point of existence. Since its inception in 2004, the program proliferated and brought in over $1,400,000 in revenue. Advent, an emergence or arrival of something. The advent of the internet has facilitated collaboration between journalists. Implore, to beg. In his letters, Edward implored him to come to Long Island to see the house. Entreat, to ask earnestly. Akira used the occasion to entreat Naomi to marry him. Beseech, to ask with enthusiasm. The fans surrounded the pop star and began to beseech him for an autograph and a photo. Decree, to order formally. To command. The museum director decreed he would commission a painting of the cats that lived there. The noun decree is also an official order by an authority, for example, a consent decree or a government decree. Badger, to put pressure on someone by asking repeatedly. Reporters constantly badger the actress about her private life. Plea, a request from an authority. The farmers opened the meeting at the council with a plea that all regulations must be avoided. Aspiration, a desire to achieve something. People in the community share common aspirations for human rights. Characters may reminisce about their literary, artistic, or professional aspirations. My literary aspirations were killed stone dead, as my mother didn't believe in pursuing a career as a writer. Yearning, a feeling of intense desire for something usually out of reach. Yearning for New England made him drop his burgeoning career for the unknown. Fervor, intense feelings of passion. The patriotic fervor spreads throughout the nation. Impunity, immunity from punishment for a wrongdoing. Governments continue to violate many human rights with impunity. Exoneration, the act of showing that someone is not guilty because he believed in his innocence. Michael fought for his exoneration. Exemption, freedom from doing something. Many diplomats have a tax exemption that frees them from paying taxes when making purchases all over the world. Susceptible, easily influenced. Tom was highly susceptible to irrational, herd-like behavior. Naive, unaffected and innocent. He was naive in his desire to follow experienced hikers. Impressionable, easily affected. Inexperienced. During my first, impressionable years, I worked closely with the senator on the bill proposal. Vulnerable, open to being affected emotionally or physically. Children are more vulnerable to traumatic experiences. Malleable, capable of being influenced. Gold is the most malleable of all metals and can be beaten into a sheet. The malleable Adalbert of Hamburg soon became the confidant of the benevolent Henry. Malleable can describe a person or a thing. Most often, the term is used pertaining to metals. When a person is described as malleable, this person is either capable of change or easily impressionable and naive. Onerous, something difficult to carry out. He was bound by an onerous duty of being a single father in the family of four. Arduous, difficult and tiring. This dictionary represents decades of arduous work. Formidable. Fear-inspiring. Due to size, Frank showed almost superhuman courage and was, in many respects, a formidable man. Frank liked challenging himself and took on formidable tasks like learning Chinese and becoming a lawyer. Hurdle, a light, upright frame placed on the ground for runners or horses to leap or jump over during a race. Obstacles and hardships. Clearing the hurdle of mother's approval would be the toughest challenge in marrying Lee. Obsolete, no longer used. Activists rendered these laws obsolete. When we render something obsolete, we stop it from existing or happening. Supersede, to become outdated. To be replaced. My biggest desire is that the existing set of laws gets superseded by the new set of laws that protect the rights of women. The new statute superseded the old one. Dated. Out of date or old-fashioned. They lived on the second floor of a dated building in Long Island. Needless to say, the decor was dated as well. Subjugate, to defeat or conquer. During the war, the force of violence is used to subjugate one person to another. Vanquish, to defeat and conquer. Especially in a war, to vanquish the enemy, they had to find a formidable man to command the army. Subordinate, of inferior power and importance. While the cadet was subordinate to her lieutenant, she possessed greater leadership skills. Suffrage, the right to vote in political elections. Feminists beseech other women to join the call for women's suffrage enfranchisement. Granting of a right or privilege, becoming free from political subjugation. World War I hastened women's enfranchisement. Patriarchal, regarding a social system in which men play the dominant role. I refute the patriarchal theory of society, and advocate for women's enfranchisement. Domestic, having to do with home or household affairs. The domination of domestic life by men threatens the nation's progress. Dominion. Dominance. Men's attempt to maintain dominion over women must be condemned by all. Abate, to become less strong, to subside. The controversy over slavery would abate. Annexation, the act of taking control of a country or region, especially by force, the act of joining a larger mass, so as to increase in size. Overall, the U.S. annexation of Texas in 1845. Station, position or rank. God appointed women to the subordinate station. Sovereignty. Autonomy. State sovereignty grants the right for every state to carry out its own policies, without consulting with its neighbors. Entrenched. Deeply established. A deeply entrenched tradition of male dominion bothered her at night. Peculiar, odd or weird. In the 19th century, slavery defenders in the South described slavery as their peculiar institution. Naturally, they didn't imply that the practice of slavery was odd or weird. Instead, they were using the word in its former sense. Distinct and original. Populist, someone or something siding with the majority of the population. Both top candidates are about to roll out populist proposals to appeal to voters. Speculate, to form a theory without any firm evidence. Scientists began to speculate about Maguire's unexpected results. Consider, to think about carefully. The researchers had to consider the dubious results of the experiment. To consider also means to regard or be in common agreement. Organic fertilizers are considered to be a more sustainable option. Consideration. Reconsideration, careful thought over a period of time. A scientific breakthrough leads to the reconsideration of the existing dogma. Evaluate, to form an idea. The study design was altered in response to recent findings, while the null results had to be interpreted and evaluated. Ascertain, to find out for certain. What this is cannot be ascertained without completing a double-blind study. Consensus, general agreement. Without consensus, claims about these genes will be disputed, assertions risky, and the results made obscure. Consent. Agreement to do something. If the professor gives his consent, we can begin planning further studies. A common medical term, informed consent, may help you remember the noun consent. Informed consent is a form that all patients must sign before beginning a treatment that may have negative consequences. This is a type of agreement that is given in full knowledge of the possible consequences. Doctrine. Dogma, a set of beliefs usually proclaimed by an institution, like a church, or a political party. The doctrine of non-involvement caused scientific progress to stagnate. Contention, a heated disagreement. Another point of contention will be the role of genetic research in the Catholic country. Misconception, a misunderstanding. This myth may stem from a misconception about what happens when we wash our hands with soap. Impugn, to dispute validity. Wilson has demanded an apology for what he called a baseless attempt to impugn his integrity. Incongruous, out of harmony. There is something incongruous about seeing peaches on the shelf of a butcher's shop. Irreproachable, perfect, blameless. The professor's background was irreproachable. Immaculate, clean, neat, pure. The Tokyo cabs are immaculate, down to the covers on the headrests. In biology, the term immaculate refers to being free from spots and marks. Uncontaminated. Not compromised. To ensure an uncontaminated sample, the students washed and disinfected their hands before collecting the particles. Exemplary. Very good, serving as a model. As exemplary citizens, they pay their taxes and participate in community events. Pragmatic, dealing with things in a sensible and realistic way. Before spending any money on the research, he tried to make a very pragmatic prediction of the outcome. Viable, doable, sustainable, able to germinate or grow. After carefully planting the trees, the gardener was disappointed to learn that only one of them was viable. Feasible, capable of being done. To verify the feasibility of the undertaking, they initiated a test group first. Sound. Showing good judgment. NASA engineers always strive for sound construction and design. Notice here we are not talking about music or noise creation. Rather, we are talking about building something stable and firm. Impractical. Not likely or wise to be carried out. Deemed impractical. That idea was replaced by a less risky proposition. Unreasonable. Not subject to reason. Dr. Lucy's suggestion was unreasonable and would yield more harm than good. Note that the word unreasonable has a second common meaning, beyond reason, or too hard. Lucy had to work unreasonable hours before becoming a doctor. Unsound. Not logical. Invalid. The proposed process is not only expensive but also environmentally unsound. Inconsequential. Illogical. Not yielding effective consequences. The findings of the study were largely inconsequential, and scientists struggled to analyze such data to come up with a consensus. Conspicuous. Obvious. During the mating season, males also develop conspicuous plumage on their necks. There is a conspicuous gap between what science can offer and what humanity is ready to receive. Flagrant. Clearly offensive. It was a flagrant violation of human rights. Blatant. Completely obvious. When the evidence was so blatant, he could no longer continue his deception. Substantial. Considerable importance or grand size. Our frequent fishing is removing a substantial amount of nutrients from the oceans. Audacious. Bold. Openly showing a desire to take risks. So perhaps it is time to talk about the audacious idea of geoengineering in earnest. Inconspicuous. Not easily noticeable. A nova is a sudden brightening of an otherwise inconspicuous star. Subtle. Not obvious. Sometimes the professor's intervention is so subtle that you could easily miss it. Clandestine. Secretive and hidden. Hard to see. The clandestine nature of environmental damage typically makes prosecutions difficult. Underground. Conducted in secret. The department supported his underground stem cell research. Empirical. Based on experiment. This theory is grounded in empirical support. Data-driven. Based on data, or real information. Scientists had a lot of data to sift through, so the outcome will be data-driven. Irrefutable. Beyond any doubt. Once the method was supported by a number of double-blind studies, it became irrefutable. Hypothetical. Based on an idea or hypothesis. Monopoles are hypothetical particles that hold a north or south magnetic pole. Theoretical. Based on theory. Perhaps you are just starting a controversy for the sake of theoretical discussion. Contingent. Dependent on something else. The results of the study are contingent upon obtaining an uncontaminated sample and a control group. Perennial. Lasting for a long time. Enduring. His wholesale nursery focuses on perennial plants from around the globe that are suitable for novices. You can also describe something never-ending as perennial, like a perennial debate or a perennial problem. Everlasting. Lasting forever. Commercials say diamonds are everlasting, and so are gold, silver, and other gemstones. Perpetual. Not ending or changing, continuing forever. Sadly, perpetual motion machines don't exist. Because of the CEO's temper, his assistants had a high turnover rate, and the role of the CEOs. Right hand was a perpetual hot seat. Eternal. Seeming to last and persist forever. The Streisand effect is an eternal internet joke. Transient. Impermanent. Lasting only a short time. The transient nature of fashion implies constant change. Ephemeral. Lasting a very short time. The ephemeral nature of the web entices daily production of new content. Evanescent. Quickly leaving sight or memory. Evanescent particles were going in and out of sight. We enjoyed the evanescent sunset basking in the sun. Unfounded. Having no empirical support as a researcher, he should avoid making such unfounded assumptions. Unwarranted. Not justified or authorized. Using elevated vocabulary correctly in public would bestow unwarranted credibility on you. Baseless. Not grounded. In fact, the populists' Asvab were, of course, baseless and resulted in a hoax. Diversify. To change or alter. To create variety. Many investors recommend that you diversify your portfolio of stocks to hedge the risks. Fluctuate. To change. Often the price of gold fluctuates daily. Permutation. Variation. A myriad of permutations are possible inside a long molecule. Unvarying. Unchanging. The judge's courtroom style was unvaryingly rigid. Uniform. Same. Alike. The inflatable bed was uniformly filled with air. Homogeneous, being of a similar kind or nature. Although they may look homogeneous, every grain of sand on the beach is unique. Haphazard, random, disorganized. Although hummingbirds may look haphazard in flight, they're actually very precise flyers. To most of its users, the internet might seem like an inexplicably haphazard system. Arbitrary. Based on random choice or personal preference, many scientists try to segment the sky in an arbitrary way, creating a multitude of problems for future progress. Erratic, uneven, unpredictable in nature. The nation needed a rigid monetary approach after many years of erratic policies. Irreconcilable, incapable of being solved. If you like Drake and your parents prefer Mozart, choosing a concert to attend as a family may be too great a hurdle to overcome. Your irreconcilable differences in music may have you attending two different shows. The professor had some nearly irreconcilable objections to this version of the study. Uncompromising. Unwilling to concede or make compromises, stubborn. Both researchers took an uncompromising stance, which ultimately prevented them from reaching a consensus. Yield, to generate or produce. Please note that this is the second meaning of the verb yield. The first meaning is to surrender or give way. The research project yields data that initiated a new set of questions. Most genes can yield a variety of transcripts through a process called splicing. Yield, the full quantity or amount. When you start baking, you will find that the yield for the cupcake dough varies from 12 cupcakes to 16 or even 18. Accrue, to grow by accumulation. Students try to accrue extra credit points to mitigate a possible bad final grade. Impede, to stop, prevent, or delay progress. Biologists acknowledge that disrupting the activity of selected host proteins may impede viruses. Agricultural zoning would impede commercial development in some areas. Hinder, to create obstacles that result in poor performance. Designers are often freed from dress codes and other constraints, like wearing a uniform, because they are considered to hinder creativity. Thwart, to prevent from accomplishing. This study could explain why some pathogens are able to thwart the human immune system. Inhibit, to prevent. Cold water inhibits plant growth. The poor economic conditions inhibited population growth. Detrimental, harmful. This type of farming yields inferior produce and is detrimental to long-term productivity. Pernicious, creating enormous harm, especially when done gradually or gone unnoticed. Any human is susceptible to the pernicious power of groupthink. Adverse, unfavorable. Hostile. So far the only adverse reactions to the new medication have been headaches and amplified restlessness. Celestial, related to the sky. Astronomical observations tell us that all celestial objects are composed of matter. Interstellar, occurring between the stars. As the shock wave travels through space, it bursts into interstellar material like constellations. Pseudostar, not a genuine star. Any bright light coming from the sky could be identified as a star. In fact, this is a pseudostar. Gravity, the force that pulls toward the center of the Earth. Thrown darts would continue to travel forward if it weren't for gravity, which slows them down and brings them to the floor. Inundate, to overwhelm or flood. The dean was inundated with angry phone calls from parents. The city in Japan was inundated right after a tsunami. Glut, to overfill or ASVA bisfy fully. Although the market is glutted with lawyers, many students pursue a legal education. ASVA burate, to fill. Political advertisements are becoming ubiquitous, and ASVA burate both analog and digital space. Stewardship, leadership, management. Under his stewardship, the company became lucrative after years of losses. The executive is responsible for the fiscal stewardship of the Fleetwood's budget. Another meaning for stewardship is care. Climate change and environmental stewardship have become international concerns. Conservancy, a public agency concerned with nature preservation. The Conservancy and city park staff will install and maintain the garden. As a noun, conservancy can also mean care and preservation. He said the mismanagement of the site didn't hinder the conservancy of the Titanic artifacts. Broach, to bring up a subject in Conver ASVA buy-in. During the meeting, we hardly broached the topic of environmental conservancy. Only a few economists have the guts to broach the fact that the market is glutted with homes. Moot, to raise a question. Cameron himself mooted a similar idea for a basic tax rate relief. A number of possibilities have been mooted for gleaning more from the wealthy. Advance, to bring up an idea or argument. The author also advanced an alternative argument in his statement. Empathize, to understand someone's feelings. It's easier to genuinely empathize with the reasonably upset customers than do it out of pretense. Sympathize, to share someone's feelings. Entrepreneurs often sympathize with each other. Compassionate, caring, understanding. It takes a heart with compassionate reach to make the tender and slow journey in memory of others. Relate, to identify with. Teachers make an extra effort to relate to their students. Phenomenon, a remarkable event or person. Note that the word is also used to describe an observable event, whether it's remarkable or not. Initially, people thought of comets as a natural celestial phenomenon. Quirk, an extraordinary feature. A quirk of human psychology could help explain these persistent underestimates. Paradox, a contradiction. The poignant paradox is that by losing their identity, they have transcended it. The fact that technology is creating and destroying jobs simultaneously is the greatest paradox of our time. Cognitive, pertaining to the brain. Many cognitive skills develop alongside the acquisition of language. Cognition, thinking and other mental processes. The frontal lobe is considered to be the hub for cognition and behavior in the brain. Neural, related to the physical aspects of the brain and nervous system. This device finally transmits neural impulses to the brain. Neuron, a brain cell that transmits nerve impulses. For a neuron to fire, it must receive stimuli from two other neurons. Synapse, a connection in the brain that allows a neuron to pass an electrical or chemical signal to other brain cells. As people change habits, their neurons and synapses change accordingly. This is one of the first studies to show how synapses in this region are altered. Raw data, a collection of information not yet processed or organized. When it comes to measuring population growth, raw census data become an essential tool. Proxy, an agent or a representative. They accuse him of being a proxy for his condemned predecessor. When data scientists use something as a proxy, they use it instead of the real thing to create an approximate prediction. Urbanization is not a proxy for an area's well-being. Aggregate, a whole created by combining distinct parts. And aggregate demand for cleaning services drove the business. Aggregate data describes data combined from several measurements. Correlation, a connection between two or more things. There is a correlation between warm weather and the increase in ice cream sales. However, it's important to know that a correlation doesn't always imply causation or a cause and effect relationship. Causation, the initiation of a causal relationship between things. Although he was feeling better after taking the supplements, the doctor couldn't identify any medical causation. Fiscal, pertaining to money, taxes, and government revenue. The company's current austere fiscal policy is hardly comparable to the former, more reckless one. Prosperous, wealthy, abundant. During two exceedingly prosperous decades, increased spending was justified. Squanderer, a spender, someone who likes wasting money and resources. The country was the biggest squanderer of the natural resources. Squander, to waste money or resources. The research team was presented with an opportunity they couldn't afford to squander. He squandered the chance to assume a leadership position at his company. Affluent, having a lot of money and wealth. Luxury stores target affluent customers. Compound, a mixture. Other findings implicated yet another potential compound involved in the damage. Remnant, a surviving trace. The artwork was restored, but some say remnants of the damage can still be seen. Surge, a sudden, powerful movement. A recently published study about the healing property of probiotics have prompted a surge in their popularity. Analogous, similar or comparable in a limited way. The process could be analogous to the mechanism for controlling DNA replication. Rampant, actively growing, in an extravagant fashion. Cell phone addiction is rampant among teenagers. Couch, to be expressed in a particular way. The issue was couched in relative terms. The problem was couched in pseudo-politeness. Usually, the verb couch is used to hide something from plain sight and make it less conspicuous. When you couch an issue, you express it obscurely and indirectly. He was able to restate the venom from his original post, but this time it was couched in pseudo-politeness. Shelve, to decide not to proceed with a proposal or idea after meeting with executives. The negotiations ended and the story was shelved. Handle, to overcome, to withstand. He handled those adverse conditions with grace. Hamper, to get in the way. The team's effort was severely hampered by the lack of consensus. Table, to put aside for future consideration. The project will remain tabled until someone finds money. Air, demeanor or mood. She answered questions with an air of boredom. Air. To express, broadcast, or articulate publicly. He used social media to air his messages. Nature, character, disposition. Private by nature, he struggled when answering personal questions in interviews. Natural, a person for whom a skill is inherent or innate. Hollywood movies love a lone hero, and Edison was a natural for such hagiography. Doctor, to alter or modify in order to deceive. Insiders have told investigators that reports may have been doctored for decades. Many saw doctored screenshots in the past, which were passed off as original tweets. Prescribed, given or ordered as her father's favorite, she will have no prescribed duties and responsibilities. He was taking his time in everything, keeping up with the prescribed rhythm of slow suburbia. Plastic, changeable, malleable. The use of human keratinocytes with gene suppression has proven to make the brain more plastic. Bees' behavior is very plastic, which makes them perfect for this experiment on behavioral conditioning. Stomach, to approve of, to be able to enjoy. The eminent domain issue is the one the liberals will have to stomach. Affect, to pretend or simulate. She affected a strong British accent. Even though she was very touched by his words, she affected indifference. He deliberately affected a Republican stance to avoid cutting remarks from his Republican friends. Knowing that his teacher was looking in his direction, he affected a frown of concentration on his face while his mind was wandering somewhere else. Embroider, to elaborate, embellish, or exaggerate. Duke refused to embroider his story to make it any more exciting to listen to. As a fiction writer, his purpose is to intensify mood and embroider emotion. Facility, a talent or innate ability. Aptitude. Robinson's creative facility with words was a quality no teacher could instill. This camera can work with equal facility in the light and dark. Foundation. Underpinnings, basis. These rumors have no solid foundation. Store, a reserve kept for future use. He was proud of his vast store of knowledge. In store, coming in the future. About to happen. The team advising the CEO on tech policy offers a hint about what may be in store. Maintain, to remain unchanged. The walls maintained their vibrant color regardless of the weather damage. Account, a detailed explanation. In her account of the study, she omitted an important detail. Account, to have an opinion. This study was accounted a success. Bank on, to rely on. Jeff was banking on his dad's benevolence. Bank, to pile up high, to accumulate. Walker banked the wood against the wall. Arrest, to put a stop to. The board of directors failed to arrest the fall of the department. Commit, to promise to carry out in earnest. The president was committed to restoring constitutional fidelity. Conviction. A strong belief. Peter's conviction that poetry must be embraced never wavered. Plug, promoting an event or product. Everywhere he goes, he always manages to get in a plug for his new book. Pull the plug, to discontinue, to put to an end. After a few seasons, the production company finally pulled the plug on the project. Fuse, to merge to form something uniform. Atoms of hydrogen are fused to make helium. Beam, to smile fully, from cheek to cheek. When she heard she was getting a major salary increase, she couldn't help but beam. Coin, to invent. Evelyn would coin the term speed reading. Currency. Acceptance of an idea. The coaching profession has gained currency all over America. Exchange, Conver Asva buy-in. In this exchange, they switched roles so the prosecutor became his confidant. Credit, praise. The professor never took credit for his brilliant discoveries and always made them about the team's effort. Host, myriad. A host of memories inundated her mind. Check, to control. To stop from proliferating. To check government spending, the committee decided to pause the program. To check yourself, to stop yourself. She wanted to tell him that she was leaving town, but she checked herself. It wasn't the right moment. Reservations, doubts. She had a lot of reservations about marrying Jack. Reserve, to hold off, to postpone. She had to reserve her judgment until all the raw data were processed. Foil, a background that amplifies contrast. Her mellow piano techniques are an ideal foil for his soaring voice. Foil, to put a stop to. They were able to foil this robbery quickly. Raw, not yet organized. This raw data needs further analysis. Scale, a relative size, extent, or degree. After the prototype was approved, the company was now ready to manufacture computers on a massive scale. Grill, to question intensely. They were grilled by detectives for several hours. Mint, a large amount of money. That book must be worth a mint. Milk, to obtain in a dishonest way. He has milked a small fortune from the company over the years. Draw, to attract. The movie is drawing a large audience. Distant, aloof. Emotionally uninvolved. She gave him a distant look, as her mind was obviously focused on something else. Broad, having variety. Worldly. His article was clearly aimed at a broad audience. Steep, high, big. Suddenly had to pay a steep price for this mistake. The publisher anticipated a steep decline of sales in the summer. Matter, issue, affair, problem. It's a matter for the government. They had important matters to discuss. Compound, to make more intense. Procrastination only compounded the problem. Magnitude, strength. We didn't realize the magnitude of the matter. See what we did there. Sap. To drain or deplete. The stress sapped him of his confidence. Solvent. Able to pay all debts. The company was able to stay solvent due to the recent funding influx. Value, a principle or belief. She always revered traditional values. Fair. Acceptable, appropriate. That was a fair question given his volatile situation. Independent, separate or distinct. This matter was affected by 4 independent factors. Term, the end of a particular period of time. This view of the economy is approaching its term and will soon become outdated. Gravity, seriousness. Sadly, the interns didn't realize the gravity of the situation. Static, unchanging or fixed. Stock market prices, which have been static, are now experiencing a steep decline. Observe, to follow. He religiously observed the set of laws that the state published. State, a condition or stage in the physical being of something. The U.S. economy was in a bad state. State, government. When working in Washington, he was deeply involved in the matters of state. Harbor, to hold persistently in mind. The verb harbor is more often used in the negative sense. He still harbors ambitions of revenge. Flag, to lose energy, to tire. Around the 2-hour mark, the audience's attention began to flag, and by the 3rd hour, half of them had walked out of the film. Pine. To long for intensely and persistently. She pined for him for months after he'd gone. Style, to cultivate a specific set of attributes. He styled himself after Mr. Crimsworth. Impression, an appearance. He gave off an impression of great success. Sound, valid or reasonable. She was making a sound argument. Scrap, to eliminate or replace. After the funding was delayed, they had to scrap their plans for this new research project. Sheer, pure. This casual exchange was a sheer delight. Train, to fixate on. He trained his eyes on the door. Track, to follow. The research project entails tracking the careers of 800 college graduates. Bent, a strong liking or inclination. He had a bent for math. Qualify, to provide more information, or a greater degree of detail. I want to qualify what I said earlier about my ability to carry out the project. I didn't mean I couldn't do the project by myself, only that I would need more time if I did it solo. Unqualified, absolute, utmost. The festival was an unqualified success. Weight, importance, significance. People assigned weight to a moral behavior. Constitution, an individual's physical makeup. The football player had a solid constitution. Fine, well developed, exceptional. This was a fine example of modern architecture. Discriminating, able to judge and discern. Contemporary audiences have become more discriminating. Patent. Glaringly obvious. Her mother made the patent observation that taking the bus was going to be faster than walking. Appreciate, to increase in value. Their investments have appreciated over the years. Appropriate, to set aside for a specific purpose. $5 million have been appropriated for research into the rare disease. Hobble, to prevent, to impede. Our research is hobbled by the amount of bureaucracy involved. Release, to liberate. The new building will be Release, to liberate the new building will be finished as soon as the government releases the funds. Source, to obtain from a particular place. We source our meat from organic farms in upstate New York. Flush. To force something out into the open. The authorities flushed the criminals out of hiding by releasing attack dogs. Temper, to soften the effect of the summer heat, was tempered by a light breeze. Margin, an amount above the minimum required. He won by a narrow margin. Suspend, to intentionally stop for a time, to defer. In the theater, we intentionally suspended disbelief. Wax, to increase in size. Public interest in the matter has waxed and waned over the years. Bind, to put under an obligation. The agreement bound him to secrecy. Core. Essential, the use of new technology is core to our strategy. Tender, to offer up, usually something formal. He was so put off by the company's culture that he tendered his resignation after only 3 weeks. Buckle, to bend and give way under pressure, or strain. A weaker player would buckle under such pressure. Casual, without much thought or care. To a casual reader, the book may seem to end with a moment of triumph and freedom. Fleece, to cheat or swindle. It was only when Harry arrived at the theater that he realized he'd been fleeced. The tickets were fake, and he was denied entry. Wake, aftermath. There have been demonstrations on the streets in the wake of the recent bomb attack. Grief, annoyance with his kind of temper. As a teenager, he caused his parents a lot of grief. Subdued, unusually quiet, less active. She was in a subdued mood. The company may suffer as consumer spending remains subdued. Weather, to withstand. The company just managed to weather the recession. August, esteemed, revered, impressive. We were faced with an august group of executives. Precipitate, to make something happen abruptly. This last pay cut precipitated the strike, and remains the major cause of employees' dissatisfaction. Becoming, suitable, appropriate, regarding clothing, attractive or flattering. It was not very becoming behavior for a teacher. Critical. Essential or important. The clock is ticking over. A critical decision. Minute, tiny minute amounts of chemicals in the water didn't scare him, and he drank it anyway. Modest, minor, insignificant, unexceptional. He made some modest progress. Telling, revealing. Perhaps equally telling is that most Americans aren't all that focused on saving. Sedulous, hardworking and attentive. While this word might remind you of sedentary, it has a different Latin root, meaning busy or diligent. Think of sedulous as a combination of diligent and detail-oriented. The father sedulously painted each of the small toy trains before presenting them to his son. Restive, restless, agitated. Though this word might sound like restful, it signifies the exact opposite. Unruly and uncontrollable are 2 synonyms for restive. The citizens became restive in the wake of the earthquake, their supplies dwindling and little relief on the horizon. Peruse, to read carefully. Synonyms for peruse include scrutinize and inspect. It is always advisable to peruse legal documents. Intimate, very detailed, thorough. The programmer had intimate knowledge of this software. Want, lack, deficiency. This house is in want of a repair. For want of, because of the lack of. The project failed for want of organization. Wanting, lacking. They were wanting in confidence. Passion. Enthusiasm. She had a great passion for her hometown. Pedestrian, lacking wit and imagination. The movie was average, and it followed a pedestrian plot. Rail against, to criticize severely but more than once recently, he has railed against bureaucratic obstructionism. Ford, to cross a river at a shallow place. At dusk we forded a stony riverbed, and saw that a village loomed on the bank.